my computer. Cool. Recording now. You can continue.
Okay, great. So continuing, so there are a lot of terms thrown around when it comes to the world of data. You have data science, you have data analytics, statistical analysis, you have big data. So I think it is good to demystify all of it and see what exactly they mean. And they all are different, by the way. So data science is the umbrella term. So it has techniques from maths, stats, a lot of programming, and basically that from the synthesis to the end. So it starts from data collection to then data cleaning, data interpretation, visualization, and solving the issue. And it has a lot of high-level programming in it that would include, creating new algorithms or making predictive models. So it's an entire field of how to work with unstructured raw data. Now, data analytics is a part of it. Data analytics is basically using these raw files. Again, so sorry to go back, but data science has a lot of collection and cleaning involved in it. So data analytics is when you get these raw data files and then you try to see if you have any meaningful correlations and if you can use that data to make certain inferences or predictions. Now, the third thing is statistical analysis. So a lot of people who are not, say, aware of data analytics think that it's just an extension of statistical analysis. And yes, data analytics has a lot of maths and stats involved in it. But statistical analysis at the end is just taking a sample set, using different statistical techniques to understand a bigger population. Whereas data analytics is taking raw data or taking this huge sample and cleaning it, wrangling it, manipulating it, and visualizing it in a way so that you can communicate something to a non-technical person. And it also has a lot of business knowledge built into it. So yes, you need to know stats and maths to do analytics, but it's not the end of it. So for anybody who's hesitant because they might not have a background in mathematics or statistics, I think you need not worry, and you can still explore a lot of it without necessarily being very adept at it. That being said, I think it's good to start with statistical analysis on the side while you also learn tools like visualization and cleaning. And I have suggested 2 courses here. So one is data analysis for social sciences, and that is a course by MIT, Esther Duflo with edX. And that basically takes you through an entire subject of impact evaluations, RCTs, statistical analysis, and gives you a fairly good idea of how, this world. And I think the second course is statistical learning. So this is specifically if you want to learn more about statistics and different techniques. So it starts from something very basic as regressions and then goes all the way to complex machine learning in SVMs. And this is a course by a Stanford professor that is also available on edX, and both of them are free. So I think this was just to give you an idea of what the analytics world is. And as we use more and more of it in policy making and in governance, it's good to kind of understand where we are coming from. I think over to you, Radhika, I will just, okay.
So before going into different coding languages that you should basically know when we are dealing with policy analysis in general, I think talking about how you perceive data when it comes in front of you is really important. And that's why I wanted to discuss these 6 principles of data analysis that I had learned a while ago when I was in my data science course. And wait, did you change this slide? Is there the
sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. So before going into discussing the coding languages, I just wanted to discuss how you perceive the data and how you should anticipate what is required from when you are actually doing the data analysis. So one of the first principle comes is accuracy, and accuracy doesn't mean in a literal sense that your answers from the data are supposed to be accurate, but it's more about being able to anticipate what could go wrong with the data that you are collecting. So it's a way to be able, it's a way of deliberation to be able to minimize your errors that you get when you look at a particular data set, or maybe like try to figure out, for example, like if you have a data set, whether it's uniquely identified, and putting in like higher frequency checks or back checks to those particular data sets when raw data comes in your hands, and you have to start cleaning it before you can actually analyze it. So catching those errors and anticipating those errors is extremely important when you're actually dealing with data. Second is basically computational reproducibility, and it can be divided into like two concepts of like replication and reproducibility. And I know that it sounds the same, but it's actually a little bit different. So in terms of replication, what happens is that when you are looking at a particular paper and you're looking at like particular tables or like regression analysis that a paper has produced, you would come to think that is that data actually reproducible, to be able to see whether it can be contextualized in a different manner. And that's why if there is a code that is associated with that particular like paper that you could actually use, the being able to reproduce those results is actually really important. And then in addition to that, replication, reproducibility becomes really important, because when, as you've seen, like in AEA registries, you have to like have pre-analysis plans, you have to come up with the documentation of the data, you have to store your data and clean your data in a particular way, so that everything that's associated with that particular data analysis project in general should be used by a particular person in an easy and transparent way. So that's how you understand, and that's how you know like the quality of the paper is actually really good, if they are able to give you all the information that you need to be able to reproduce the results that they have done in the paper. Third is human interpretability. And here it's mostly about how is the style in the way that how you basically write the code that you're supposed to be producing for a particular data analysis task. And what you don't want to do in general is that have like a one line of code just going in like continuation. You always need to have like these particular like initiation, like differences, or like make certain like white spaces in between the comments, in between the code, so that you can actually, so that people who are actually reading your code can actually understand what is happening. Like if you just like have a bunch of code which is related to a particular data analysis task you're doing, but it doesn't explain what you're actually doing, is going to be really difficult for somebody else who's trying to read your code. So it's also a very like iterative task in a way that clear code needs to talk about what you're doing, but commenting is really important in terms of representing to the other person who's reading your code in terms of what or how you are doing that. So that's why commenting with coding is really important when you are going through like making your code for the data analysis task. Fourth is portability. This comes at a later stage when you are actually dealing with like a particular team of researchers, or like a particular team of data scientists, where each of them are contributing to that particular task. And what happens is that you need to create, I think going forward when we will like discuss like macros or file paths, in a way that analysis should be done so that strangers can also understand each other at every step of the way without the instruction. So like if I have a code in my laptop and I have a file path for my name, I should be able to have another file path written so that anyone else who's using a different kind of like a laptop or a desktop should be able to use my code in the same manner that I have been doing it, and would not require any additional steps. Fourth is accessibility, and this is like a growing discussion in terms of how projects in general need to be shared with the econ and like policy community, where researchers increasingly like to now share their code and share their resources and share their documentation with researchers who are actually learning from the field that they are actually experts in. And that's why, because research and data are tools which are like non-rival and like non-exclusive, researchers all around the world are trying to create a community where there are ways to promote the ability that everyone can have access to those particular like code or structures or documentation that is required to achieve a data analysis task. And sixth and the last point is efficiency, where it just means that given the best practices approach that have been taken upon by researchers across the world, and like establishing a stable workflow so that everybody can and should be able to use the data or the code that you're producing in the way that it should be really efficient, and it helps in managing the computation of data. Now over to,
I think this is a small video to see how data analytics is being used in healthcare to help fight diseases. So.
Remember the Black Death? The plague killed 75 to 200 million people, wiping out about 60% of Europe's entire population in the 14th century. Infectious diseases remain difficult to handle. However, modern technology has brought us close to eradicating polio, the second human disease in history that we will have stopped for good. Less than 3 decades ago, the disease was still rampant in 125 countries, crippling 1,000 children every day. Since then, the incidence of polio has decreased by 99%. How did the world manage that kind of progress? In 1988, the Global Polio Eradication Initiative was founded by the World Health Organization, UNICEF, the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and Rotary International, and later joined by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They fight the disease by doing 2 essential things simultaneously: finding out where polio is occurring and protecting kids from it using vaccines. Because of the partnership, millions
Hello, Soumya. This is Richa here. We are not able to hear the audio of this on the video.
Hi, is nobody able to hear the audio?
Yeah, I wasn't able to hear it either.
No.
Yeah, it stopped like halfway through.
Okay, just a second. Maybe there was an issue. Just a second. Is this?
valuable information and
Shall I start from here?
cases, the size of the outbreak, population,
Or do you want me to
and
go
information on
again?
vaccination.
Yeah, it's a bit light still, like the sound. I think maybe since we'll be sharing slides, or we can just send the link. Or can you post a link of this on the chat?
Sure. Okay, and anyway, we are going to share it. So if you want, we can skip and then.
Yeah, if everyone can hear it now, we can just play like the half that's left.
Just a second.
Vaccine doses
Now can everyone hear it?
data about cases, the size of the outbreak, and population affected, and
Yes,
information
yes.
on the vaccination program is then collected and shared with the whole partner network via a centralized global data platform called POLIS. Combining these massive amounts of valuable information and looking at it holistically has made tremendous advances possible. Joint research helped to develop new tools for better estimating population numbers. Knowing how much vaccine is needed for an area makes a great difference. Because only 1 in 200 people who carry the virus get sick, as total case numbers began to drop dramatically, it became increasingly important to track the infection by detecting the virus in sewage samples before it can lead to cases. Thanks to better data available rapidly, every new outbreak can now be responded to within about 72 hours. Meanwhile, global partnerships push forward new diagnostic tools, better childhood vaccines, and outbreak response strategies, making eradication more likely than ever before. It doesn't end there. The polio system, including reaching children in remote areas, supply chains, and surveillance measures, are used to support other health threats like Ebola, measles, and leading childhood killers such as pneumonia and severe diarrhea. Eradicating polio will be one of the greatest achievements in human history, making a positive impact on human health for generations to come.
Okay. So moving on, we have Bhavita.
Can you all hear me and see me?
Yes.
Perfect. Good evening. Actually, thank you, Soumya and Radhika. So I'm going to take about 5 minutes to walk you all through why I think it's important for girls to get into computing and computer science. So as you can see on the slide, less than 30% of Indian girls are part of BTech and BE courses, and this is specifically engineering, right? And furthermore, post-college, the number even decreases. So in the reduced pie of 30%, only 26% of this pie become engineers or technology creators in India, or even if there is a brain drain happening, if Indian women move out of the country, very few women actually represent in computer science. So it's concerning, surely, but if we also look at how it impacts a country, there is a great amount of data which shows that lesser participation of women in a growing economy or in an emerging market or an emerging industry leads to actually a lesser growth of the country, right? So there have been multiple RCTs done. I'll be happy to share the research around it as well, wherein they've said that there are 4 factors because of which women are underrepresented in this tech sector. So one being societal pressures, second being the term is called the mindset hijack, where slowly women or girls at a certain age, in the impressionable age to be specific, the mindsets are twisted to not think towards certain careers, right? And then let's say they do sail through it and they walk into a role in the tech sector, they are forced to deal with you cannot do it, and then finally there's the glass ceiling which curbs women from taking up senior management roles, right? So I worked in Girls Who Code, which is a not-for-profit based out of New York, as an international partnership consultant. So I helped Girls Who Code to expand here in India, right? And the main vision that we were chasing was to inspire, educate, and especially equip girls to look at these 21st century careers as a viable and a plausible option for them. And we started doing it at an early age, which is ages 11 and 18, to hijack the mindset which is being twisted through societal pressures. And we were also trying to target young women because more often than not, I may be sounding a bit partial here, but the best performing students in a class tend to be girls, right? But somehow that doesn't translate into a tech company. Where are all these good, smart, intelligent girls uh, seeping out of, in that value chain? So we wanted to ensure that we work with girls in this ages because they're highly smart, intelligent, they're ready to absorb as much as possible, by giving computer science programs for free, right? And if you could go to the next slide. So we partnered with government departments, we partnered with NGOs and schools and colleges here in India, and we said, hey boss, listen, I think some of the girls don't have access to computer science programs, maybe because they do not have the privilege to say so. So we are going to give everything for free. Will you let the girls learn how to code, right? And a very interesting story I think I'd like to share here is, I was in a Telangana technology department, right, where majorly the power spot of the T Hub and all the startup incubations and the anything to do with technology was taken under this umbrella, under this department's umbrella. So I walked into the room because we were going through a proposal. So this room had about 40 to 50 employees. Everyone's working on the government servers and so on and so forth. So it's a very tech driven team. And I was speaking to the CTO saying, this is the curriculum, this is how it goes, these are the languages teach to the girls. Would you be interested to explore it? They were all excited. So this was the final assignment, right? But somehow, if you think about it, the CTO looked at me and he said, you know what, I think Hyderabad and Bangalore, especially South India, produces the most amount of engineers and doctors, be it girls or boys from South India. These are the two main streams that parents push their children to take up. So is it fair for you to say that girls really are not taking up engineering, or they're not really getting into computer science? So I just asked him to look around in the room and point at least one woman who was working in that tech team, and there was none. So there were about 40 to 50 people working in the government technical department, but there were none. And he got the picture, right? So the representation of women in tech is very, very needed. I mean, it's as essential as having a non-biased technology. And I can give you multiple examples of how the tablets that or the software programs that teachers are using are actually not created by teachers themselves, or so on and so forth, and how data is asymmetric if we don't have enough representation of female technology creators on the board. So I would actually highly encourage all of you all, if you have cousins or if you have anyone around you who's very impressionable, to break that gender barrier and say, hey, it's not just about pink Barbies and dress ups. Maybe girls can also code, right? And thankfully, for a year, we've had successful relationships and we've served about 2 million girls across the world. But the problem persists and the journey is still, it's still, there is a long way to go. But yeah, that's about Girls Who Code, and that's about the need and the importance for all you girls to learn how to code.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was great. I think everything that Girls Who Code does is just really inspiring. And yeah, we wanted, like, now we will discuss all of the softwares and learning how to code, but we wanted to sort of discuss also why it's so important for women to be more represented. And I think it can be slightly intimidating to learn a new software. But yeah, we hope like this group sort of helps you code and learn how to code better. So yeah, thank you so much, Parvata.
Thank you.
Cool. So I'm going to talk about data now. So this is just the definition of data according to Data Core, which is that It's a complete integrated statistical software package that provides everything you need for data analysis, data management, and graphics. Not completely true, but we will discuss that when we talk about its weaknesses and strengths. But yeah, basically it allows you to store and manage data, and it takes statistical analysis on your own data and create, I'm going to say create some nice graphs, but we'll get to why not very nice graphs. So the main thing with data is that, and that's, I'm sure a lot of you are interested in learning data, is that it's very popular in social sciences and especially researchers in economics. And so if you worked as an RA directly with a professor, whether that is under something like JPAL or EPOD, or if you want to work with someone who's, at DSE or ISI, in all likelihood, everyone uses data. So a lot of the analysis that we do. And so we're just going to talk through its pros and cons, and then give you an idea of what the interface looks like. And then I'll give you an example of sort of how we typically use data in like our JPAL project. So yeah, Soumya. Soumya, can we go to the next slide? Yeah, thanks. So I think one of the biggest pros of data is that it's quite intuitive to learn. Yeah. So it's very intuitive to learn. It's very user friendly. It has great guides available on the internet, a lot of free resources, and the help command on data is very, it's pretty good, very explanatory. It's also easy to grow with, and so it's a good starting language to learn. There's a lot you can do with it. You can make reproducible graphs and publication quality tables. So you can do some GIS stuff. You can do power calculations. And it also has a lot of community contributed features to explore. So what this means is that while it's not completely open source like R, and so there are fewer user-written commands, a lot of places like IDInsight, IPA, World Bank have put together a lot of features that you can use, and those are also pretty good. And a big pro obviously is that it's commonly used for each search and dev sector jobs. It has sort of become a bit of an industry standard, even though gradually a lot of jobs and organizations are moving away from it. And finally, it's easy for running regressions and outputting results using LaTeX. So if you're working with professors, or you want to run regression tables that you want to be publishable, it's again an industry standard to use LaTeX for that. And it has a lot of the interaction between Stata and LaTeX then is quite easy, and there are a lot of packages and settings that you can use, which will give you those exact tables that you see in a typical eco research paper. The commands read like statistical equations, so this is actually one of my favorite things about it. So the kind of equation that you would write down if you were writing it on paper is similar to what you would do here. So for instance, if you're writing that you have to regress y on x, then on Stata that would literally just be REGYX. So it's, if you understand and have background knowledge with stats and econometrics, then it actually makes it easier to pick up. At the same time, that also can be a bit of a con if you're not very comfortable with stats, because the equations read like mathematical equations. So yeah, these are all of the pros. I'm going to talk about the cons, and then maybe we can take questions on what I've said so far. So, I mean, obviously the first and biggest problem with data is that it's paid for, and an individual license can cost anywhere between $125 and $425. There are free versions online. They don't always work perfectly, and at times certain commands may not work on the pirated versions. I had pirated data on my laptop for 2 years when I was in my master's, and for some strange reason, the commands for outputting tables specifically just did not work. So if I had to output any sort of tables, I'd have to write the code on my laptop, email the do file to myself, go to my lab, and then download the do file and then run it. So the pirated versions are not perfect. And the second problem is that the cost differences affect the asset sizes. So the max variables that data is going to accommodate actually depends on the version of data that you have. So if you want to work with really big data sets, you have to pay more. So that's also a problem, even if you had a paid version, and even if your organization was paying for it. Yeah, there's a lot of this problem. Can everyone just check if they're on mute? Cool. Yeah. So, and then the cost difference, like I said, affects the data set sizes. So even if your employer or you're working with a small startup and they're willing to fund your license, this could affect how much they have to pay. And then the second is because it's not open source, you can't program your own functions into Stata, and so you're limited to the functions it already supports. I do know of organizations and places that do sort of end up programming sort of things for Stata, but then a lot of times this is going to sound a bit complicated, but it involves code that goes into an Hadoop file and it's not downloadable using the official Stata search. So yeah, I'm not going to go into too much detail. Visualizations are not as aesthetic compared to R, and the one thing that I personally really respect about Stata also takes far longer to code and customize. You might think it's really straightforward to, for instance, change the sizes of your bins or the labels that you want, but it's weirdly annoying and time consuming to do graphs on Stata. I don't know why, but it just is. It's difficult to work with spatial data, and easy integrations with QGIS, etc. are not available. This is also simpler using R. And finally, a lot of departments and organizations are moving to R. For instance, the professors that I work with, they've basically shifted their data lab purely to R now. And the reason for that is usually to do with the data sets being bigger and things like that. So I think if you were really looking at learning a software purely from a forward-looking perspective, I would say Stata is getting a bit outdated. So you might want to hop onto the R bandwagon, but yeah. Those are the pros and cons. I can take questions on just the stuff I've said so far, if anyone has any.
Hi, Prerna, Saloni this side.
Hi.
So just one quick question. Given that I don't really have an economics background, I was sort of curious to know, given my limited understanding of econometrics and statistical equations in general, how is it even possible to like program on Stata without having the particular field knowledge, or is it not something that you can do?
So ultimately, it just comes down to what you want to use it for. So for instance, if you don't end up using it for a lot of the regressions, then that's perfectly fine. The reason you would need to know it if you were using it for regressions would be, for instance, there are sets of commands for whether your standard errors should be clustered, what level they should be clustered at, and what is your regression form. Then there are these different types of regression packages because they're all driven by different underlying assumptions. So it just depends on that. But for instance, if you weren't doing serious, like very intense regression, and you wanted to do data cleaning and you wanted to do some basic summary stats, that's perfectly fine. You don't need to know a lot of stats for it. You need to know basic, I would say, like mathematical logical reasoning, because a lot of the if and conditions and setting up that code is based on math. But other than that, it should be perfectly fine. It's only, again, if you're using it for regressions, you would need to know a lot of
stats. So just a quick follow-up. So does that vary between Stata and R, or does the level sort of remain the same? As in, you said you can do like basic data cleaning, but you would need to know some level of econometrics for further stuff. Does that remain same for R, or is it like comparatively easier for like someone who might not have the proper economics? Yeah.
Yeah, I think you need to know it there as well, because it's a question of what commands to use and what packages to use. A lot of times, I mean, this shouldn't be something you should feel intimidated by, because a lot of times you're working with a professor, they will tell you. So if you have to add weights to your summary stats, you can just ask them what weights you want to put, and use that as a way to understand why probability weights are being used in this case and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
If I may jump in, Saloni, sorry to cut, but so I worked as like in an analytics firm, and for almost 1 year, I did not really use much econometrics. So at the because the business question did not require it, and most of it was just visualization and looking at. So even though I worked on SAS, which is a completely different platform, unless you really need to, as Prerna said it, you don't need. Essentially need to have a knowledge of, say, high-level econometrics or maths. just to give you a practical example from my experience.
Got it. Thanks a lot.
Are there any other questions on just basic stuff right now? Cool. So we've put together some resources here. Okay, I see a question on chat, which is whether there are any sites where we can learn econometrics. You could do basic stats courses on, on Coursera, for instance. And if you want textbook recommendations, you could always use Gujarati, which is the standard textbook that's used for most stats. And usually it's not a higher level than basic econometrics and stats. So yeah. Okay. So we've put together some resources here. So on this, the JPA resources are pretty good. This is what they use for training their own RAs who join every year. There's like a staff training, and this is similar to what they use there. It has 4 different levels. So if you're really basic, you would do Stata 101, and then there's 102, 103, 104. So it's a pretty good resource. You can use cheat sheets. These are useful if you know exactly what you want to do, and this could be a good way of getting those. The World Bank has a bunch of really good resources. They also have a bunch of commands to search that they've written. You could check those out. And yeah, UCLA, for instance. Stata List is basically sort of like, I guess, like a Reddit or Quora for Stata doubts. And you can just go online and you can post whatever doubt you have, even if it's really basic, and you'll get a response within 3 to 4 hours. They have a little thing on how you should ask questions. So you can just check those out. There are some certain tools. And then you can just put whatever doubt you have. It's pretty great. You could literally put your own like anonymized data sets and ask someone, I'm trying to do this, it's not working out. What can you say? So yeah, so these are just some basic resources we've put together. Going forward, we could just have sessions as well on basic data stuff. So if you want to do this yourself on your own pace, this is a good starting point. Smriti?
Yes, thanks, Prerna. Guys, I think you'll hear me panting because I've just come back from cycling. Just please bear with that. I'll not be able to switch on my video because I'm in pitch dark settings. But can you keep the screen on? Wait. Yes. So as Prerna put it very well, I'll just tell you an instance from yesterday. I was stuck on a Stata code and I put it on Stata List because I was not able to get a solution from my friend. And I got a reply in like an hour. So that's how Stata List how quick Stata List can usually be. And your doubt can be very econometric based, can be extremely basic, or whatever function that you're working on, and they're always there to help you. Now the slide that you see in front of you is the interface of how Stata looks. And yes, Radhika has replied on the books that yes, mostly harmless econometrics is one resource that you can refer to for econometrics. So another, I think we'll keep on, we can possibly share a list of resources on what you can refer to for econometrics. For now, I'll discuss about Stata interface here. So you'll see on the screen, this is how, to the right of it, this is how Stata looks like. And it all starts with loading the data set into it. So you specify a location. And as Radhika had put it, I wanted to add one thing to it. So data is one, like primary and secondary, one which is you collect and one which is already existing out there. You just use that particular file, or you pull that file into your software and you work on it. Primary data is usually, if we talk from research and social science perspective, is calculated from, is collected from field experiments, impact evaluations, and just in general field data collection. For example, because of COVID, right now there are so many research spaces which are collecting data, professors which are collecting data on impact of COVID on certain sections of population. And that is a source of primary data that they work with. Secondary can be, for example, there can be data on, like, NSSO for that matter. NSSO for you would be a secondary data that already exists and you use it. And that's a different, your objectives out of that data would be different than your objectives and your way of functioning with primary data. So as Radhika had put it, if I talk about primary data, you'll have to go through processes of data cleaning because you're collecting the data. So you would want the data to be clean. You would want the data to be consistent, the questions that you've asked, and you'll have to do high frequency checks and all of that for it. And so I mean, as Prerna also put it, for impact evaluations and for primary data collection, people usually tend to use data because that has become like the benchmark. But gradually people have started, and people now are actually moving on to R for reasons like better visualization and easier graphic codes, because Stata is a nightmare when it comes to writing graphing code. So I'll move on to how Stata actually looks. Now, if you look at the screen and you see the number 1 here, so we'll start with loading the data first. I'll start with actually number 3 because that is where it all starts. You open a Stata command, you open the Stata software. This is Stata 16, like the latest version of Stata. There are multiple versions out there. The only difference is that with every with every new Stata version, there are more commands and there are newer functions that you can use. So let's say I start with importing the data into it. So I have given the command here, import Excel, and this is when I am importing an Excel file, an XLSS, and this is the specific command that you give for it. You could directly also be using a data file, and a data file is a Stata DTA file. In that case, the command would differ, but a Stata DTA file is, you will usually make it out of an already existing Excel, or on some websites, when you go on to download data, you will find it already in Stata forms. Like you can download World Bank data in Stata formats, Stata DTA formats, and all. So the command would differ if you want to load Stata DTA here. But since you're loading the Excel file, this is the command that there is. Now, once you've loaded the data into the Stata software, you can now see number 5. Number 5 is where your this is the result console. This is where you will see the result of the command that you've given. So since the command that I had just given was an import Excel command, I see that there's written 8 variables, 39 observations. So what it has done is it's imported the data and it's written, okay, there are 8 variables in the data and there are 39 observations. So however large your data set is, depending on that, it will show you whatever variable and observations there are. And if you want to write a command like describe, what it does is it just describes your data set, tells you a lot more things. So in this particular window where it is written 5 is where you will see the results. You can compare this interface to R when Soumya will move on to it, but that's how it pretty much is. Then number 4 is actually where it is the history of the command. So you can see, okay, I have imported. Now the next command, if I say describe, so it will be like a series of commands in one vertical order, and you can see those commands and you can browse through those commands just to know, okay, what command did you use? Then on, sorry, I'm coming to number 1 and number 2 at the last, but what you do see here is number 1 is the variables list, and variables are just the variables in the data. So here you'll see there are 8 variables. This data set has not been labeled. Otherwise, next to the variable name, you will also see what that variable actually means. So this name variable could be name of the student, name of the respondent, or whatever. And then that second window that you see here also second one, that is the properties of the variables and also the data. So in properties, you can see things like what kind of a variable that is, and then and other things about the data set. Once you know Stata better, you will understand the role and use of properties in particular. Right. So this is how it looks like in Stata. An important part of working on any of these softwares is replicability, and that is ensured by using the Stata do file in case of Stata, or in case of R, an R script. So here, right below the word graphic, you will see like a notepad kind of thing with a pencil on it. that's where you start writing the stata do file from. So it's basically just putting the commands that you've used, so that the next time I have to open this data and I have to run these commands, I can simply click execute on that do file and the commands will run automatically. This also allows me and my team to work on this data, in the sense I can simply send the data file and the Excel file or the data file and the do file to my team, and they can replicate all the results here. There are multiple ways how people approach data. Some people simply write their commands on the do file and you execute, and then you see the results in the fifth window. Or some people actually, like me, who put the command in third window, and then from the fourth window they copy paste the command to do file. Strictly not advisable. So that's how the interface usually functions. I will request Soumya, I think, to move on to the next slide. Yes, thanks. Now, an interesting thing about data here is that you can explore plethora of statistical functions, graphical functions, because they are inbuilt into the software. So if you open that statistics command, you will see multiple type of, you can see regressions, and then you can see somebody's stats, how can you work around them. And this is just statistics. You can also look at graphics. Graphics will also allow you to plot bar chart, histogram, pie chart, different kind of box plot charts from here. So what you can do is you can straight away say, I go to statistics, I go to summaries, and I want to create, let's say, I want to calculate the mean of certain variables. So I could possibly select the command from these windows, specify that, and in that case, Stata will ask me the name of the variable for which I want the mean. I will specify that, and Stata will calculate that mean automatically in the results window. And you will also get a command there. So you know, okay, this is how I can calculate mean on Stata. Whereas if you know it already, you will simply type into the command window, which was third in our case, the command that you want. That, let's say, gen xx is equal to mean math, which is math score. So I know the command, I can straight away put it and get the results. But let's say when I actually started using Stata, especially for graphs, I used to create my graph only by going to the graphics window and exploring, okay, this is how I put in one variable, this is how the graph will look like. It's after a lot of practice that you get to the point where you can just specify your commands and the results pop up, especially for some advanced and technical code. For things like generate variables, replace variables, drop, keep, these functions are pretty quick. So these are the first things that you really learn when you work with Stata, especially if you're using JPAL resources. That will be the first thing you will learn with Stata, and they're fairly quick and easy things to learn. Can you move to the next slide, Soumya? Yes, and I told you that one, you can browse through there, or you can go ahead specifying your command in the window. So you can specify the regression command. It will run the regression for you, and you know what the result is. One in like an important and useful feature of Stata is because you have these inbuilt statistics and graphics options, you can try a number of things with them. Like you can see how, for example, how your graph looks like. But at the same time, as Prerna put it, it can be a little nightmarish to work around with codes if you don't really know, especially with statistics. If you don't really know what you want, then you will spend a lot of time to read through things. But I think that's how usually this functions. Okay, so I think, can you move to the next slide, Soumya? Yes, so I think here is, I can describe this too, and so can Prerna, but I think she works at JPAL, so Prerna can take on from here. But I would just like to put out an experience. I think when I started to learn Stata, it was a nightmare for me. But I think if I could learn it, I think anybody can, honestly. I started with JPAL resources, also because that is the kind of work I wanted to do with my data, so it made it easier. Then I had a bunch of, I always had my friends and RAs who were working with me, who were ready to help me out with code, and Stata lists, of course. So it's intimidating in the beginning, but it's easy. Like you can learn to do. I don't see like extreme amount of difficulty that you will have to face. So Prin, I think you can take it forward from here.
Thanks, Shruti. Very motivating. But yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think data seems a bit intimidating, also because it looks weirdly archaic and intense. But it's doable to pick up, especially when you know what you want to get out of it. Like I used data in my master's because we would have term papers that were coming up, and we would just have to do some sort of hacky work with it. But the important thing is that even if you do something that's not a really big task, you start to get comfortable with the interface. And then by the time you have a job that requires you to write a lot of tool files, you're comfortable with how to import files, how to outsheet things. And that's basically where you should want yourself to be before a job starts. And then you learn everything on the job. So this is basically an example of how we use data in our project. So in the early stages, so this is before, when you're just thinking about a project, you would use it for power calculations. I'm not going to go into detail with this and what this means, but really briefly, what this means is what is the optimal sample size we kind of want for our study. Randomization, so taking like a sample and randomly allocating them to treatment and controls. That's something you can do through data really comfortably. Sampling, so similar to randomization, but say like I don't want to actually go study everybody. I want to study like 50% and I want to draw a sample. That's something you do using data. And then you can do balance checks. Again, it's kind of like stat thing, but it basically means checking whether everyone who's in treatment or control are similar along some sort of pre-specified socioeconomic axis. But yeah, so if you were on a project that was in its early stages, these are the kinds of things you would be doing using data. During data collection, some more sampling for back checks and for something like audio audits and stuff. Running high frequency checks. So Radhika sort of mentioned this. This is basically things like I have a lot of data that's coming in live. So say I have data coming in on expenditure and I want to see whether all of that data like sort of makes sense. So say I get in a value that says expenditure on food was more than 20,000 rupees, and I think, okay, that seems like an outlier. So you want to confirm those on the field regularly. So that's like a high frequency check. You'd want to analyze data using back checks. So say I sent 5 people in the field. I said, okay, go ask 5 questions out of the total instrument, and I want to compare responses because the responses should be same whether the back checker asked it or the main surveyor. The great thing, IPA actually has something called BC stats, so you don't have to do anything with it. It's a dream. And then finally, generating and outsheeting preliminary summary statistics is also something you would do during data collection. And then finally, post data collection, you would have data cleaning, dealing with outliers. You have a lot of other text responses you might have to recode into existing categories, analysis as in means, running regressions, and then outsheeting analysis results in figures to the way you would want it in your final paper. So depending on when you join a certain project, you could be asked to do any of these things on a typical, this is not just JPAL, like even if you were in EPOD or any place that basically has primary data collection happening. And limitations of data that, for instance, we felt, the first is that obviously you can't do web scraping with it. You might have to scrape admin data to draw your samples. So as an example, our project works with ICDS. And so our original sample of Anganwadi centers was needed to be drawn, and all of the information on Anganwadi centers is on the ICDS website. So you need to scrape a list of the AWC centers from the website. That's not something you can do on data. So we had to rope in somebody who did know Python for this. And then not so great visualization tools. So if you want to really impress your professors and have like a really fun, cool dashboard, that's not happening using data. I mean, I really dislike data graphs. So yeah, we've just given you this example to highlight if you want these kinds of jobs, then kind of work that you would be expected to learn using data. So yeah, that's it on data actually from our end. Before we move to ours, okay, firstly, do you guys have any questions on anything on data so far?
So I joined late. Sorry about that. but for me, just getting access is a little difficult because I'm not working with an organization that's like given me an account and stuff. Have you discussed that? How to crack through?
So I can arrange the latest stack version. I'm not going to do that publicly as within Econ, but if anybody wants a link to this data, just send me a personal message. I'll send you one.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, but it might not work perfectly. That's the only problem with these stack versions.
Okay, just to learn maybe in the beginning.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions on data?
Just one question. So you mentioned about the limitations of Stata, and you also mentioned how from the future perspective, it might get a little outdated. So is there any particular reason that organizations like ePod and JPAL have continued to sort of use Stata in place of other softwares that are available right now?
I mean, I think my personal hunch is just that academics are slightly lazy and slow to change. But I have seen a lot of departments making a very conscious shift to R. And like if I was thinking about a skill I should have picked up when I was before I joined, I would have probably told myself to learn R, because anything you can do on Stata, you can do on R. And if you join a job and you tell someone I'm really good at R, they're not going to say, okay, learn Stata to do this, as long as you can do that exact thing in R. So yeah. But at the same time, I guess if you want to be in academia and you want to be an RA to a professor, because they use Stata, they might want you to know Stata so that they can check your do files and look at your code and things like that.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Cool. So we actually wanted to do a couple of polls, just like a quick Zoom poll, but I have no idea how to do that. Sakshina, are you on the call? Okay, I think she's dropped out. Does anyone here know how to do polls on?
Prerna, should we do it after the session is over? We can do a combined poll. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, we'll just do it after.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we shall move on to R now. Radhika.
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, sorry. Yes, Radhika, we can. I can.
Hello? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, Radhika, we can.
Okay, because my Wi-Fi is being a little spotty, so I'm not gonna like switch on my video. I'm sorry. Okay, so can I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so actually before going into like how R is used, let's go a little step back. Like yeah, in terms of like what is R. Let's go back and like talk about how it came into being as well. So there were like these two professors who used to use this language called S, which was a predecessor of R. And while S had like some features that you could use for like common programming cases, they lacked the desired functionalities to do like econometric analysis and like the syntax that could be used. So these two professors came together and tried to come up with R, which is a language and environment for statistical computing and graphics. And at some point in time when they came up with this language back in the 90s, they were trying to market it as a commercial product, but then they decided not to, because the idea of R was to make it a free software so that anybody can use it and access it regardless of their income. So like this is like a one-up on Stata, like R is free to use, so you can use it from anywhere as long as you have, I guess, the ability to download the software. But it is actually known for its well-designed like publication quality plots. Like it is way better than Stata, in my opinion. And I'm sure like people who use Stata would also agree with me, because I moved from a Stata learner to an R learner, and I could see like the differences in terms of how intuitive R became to me once I came from like a Stata knowledge, because like their grammar of graphics, which is like their visualization package called ggplot, actually became really intuitive for me to make publication quality plots. And it is an extremely coherent system where it can be used across different platforms and runs on like Unix, Linux, Mac OS, or Windows as well. And unlike most analytics software, mostly like SAS and Tableau, it is open source and free, so anybody can use it. And at this point, and RStudio is basically like an environment, like an integrated development environment, which is on top of R, on which you actually code. And that's run by a for-profit company, but we won't go into that. But it's basically that we don't use R directly, but R functions on like, there is a functionality on top of R, which is called RStudio, where we like mostly produce and do all of our data analytical tasks. So my next slide. So in terms of rise of R, it has not, like while it began as a computer programming or a data analytical tool, it has been used by a majority of statisticians and data scientists who are using R for like data mining, mainly because of its ability to work with big data. And it is also packed with numerous built-in functions and variables that make analysis way easier. And also it is like highly extensible and includes many packages and specific analytical tasks that provide like the graphics that we are supposed to need for producing high quality visualizations. And apart from that, as you can see that across, like from the graphs that you can see, visits to R by industry, how it is used across industries as well. Like it's not only limited to computer science, but people who are in public policy, econ, sociology, epidemiology, psychology, everywhere the growth and the use of R has increased. And R is basically used to investigate and refine and analyze data more effectively and efficiently. And not only that, but R is also used for like machine learning and classification analysis and drawing graphs, and including like statistical inference and linear regressions, amongst others. Okay, next slide. Now, how is R used? So I've mostly explained it before. It is also like it is primarily used as a statistical analysis tool. So there you can use it to actually load the data, find descriptive statistics, or do regressions using the data set that you have. But the major use of R, which I've seen across all the platforms that I've been to, and what it does well is like produce really good visualizations. Like I've produced so many good visualizations in R that like they have just so many options to produce the kind of visualizations that just like look pretty. If you want pretty visualizations, I would just say use R. And apart from that, it has like a lot of, it reads different kinds of data formats as well. So it has the ability to read text formats like CSV, XML, or Excel or SAS, and DTA files as well. And what it does well, like in comparison to Stata as well, is it works well with shape files, and you can do like really good GIS plots as well on R. It has an extensive package manager as well called CRAN, where you like download all the packages depending upon the functionalities that you want to use to be able to do the data analysis that you require. And it has excellent web scraping capabilities as well. Like you just like need literally sometimes just like one line of code to be able to extract data from like maybe like the census website or like the ACS website, which is basically like the American Community Survey website here, where they store data on like different demographical factors across different years. And it can interact with APIs more efficiently, and it can run scripts from other languages as well, for example, Python. So yeah, that's how it's mostly used amongst the people in the academia, mainly because it is like it's a huge community of people who are connected together, and there are like so many books and manuals and guides on data science for using R, which have been developed by researchers like across different fields.
Okay, so moving on to advantages and drawbacks. I think Radhika has already covered most of it, but so first, yes, it is open source, and being open source, it has a huge like community of both users and developers. And having used R for a couple of months, I think this as Stata, the support is almost overwhelming, because I don't think there is any thing that has not already been answered if you just go and Google. Second is the array of packages. Now, CRAN, as Radhika said, the package manager, has over 10,000 packages. And given that it is open, anybody can add a new package according to their industry need, or if they want to do something very specific with their data. So you have just to give you an idea what this means, R has some pre-loaded packages, which is called base R. But then to build on top of it, you can download over 10, like anything, select from 10,000 packages that tailor to your use. Then it is highly compatible, like Radhika said, that you can use it with different languages. You can use it with different programming languages like C++, Java, Python, anything that you need. And it also connects to different database management systems like Hadoop and SQL. So when we do the R sessions, I think we can talk more about that. These are external database management systems that have, usually have big stuff like big data available. Then again, quality graphing and reporting, because R was designed as a GNU, as a graphical output software. It is extremely easy to, get the nuances of your graph right and to tailor it to your use. Then it is platform independent, so it can be used on Linux, it can be used on Windows, Mac, any platform that you are working on. The community is continuously growing, and so there are certain stats on Stack Overflow that show that it has been growing rapidly since 2016. It's a vectorized language, and I will get to what this means, and this is a very special function of R. And finally, it's because it is built by statisticians and for statisticians, so it's very intuitive when it comes to writing code in R. And once we start, you will see that. Some drawbacks when it comes to R. So now this depends. First, few people say that the origins of R are weak, like Radhika told you, that R comes from a language called S, and given that S was built in late 1980s, so it's a much older programming languages, so it does not support things like, say, 3D graphing or very big data analytics, but you can use external packages to solve that issue. There is a security in terms of, because it's an open software, so softwares like Tableau, SAS, proprietary softwares have better security. So that is one small drawback, which I don't think concerns us so much, but just in case. One issue with R could be that the syntax and the indentation could be a little complicated. So high-level languages, basically a high-level language is something like Python, where the language is designed to for the user to almost speak to the computer like they're speaking in normal English. Now R does not support, so again, R is not a high level language, so there will be certain syntax specifications that might be a bit more complicated that you will need to get used to. And I think the final thing, an issue that also I have been facing lately, is that so R stores all its data in one place. So you cannot have your data in chunks. So it will store data in one place, and it stores everything on its own physical memory. So when it comes to, say, working with 3 GB files or 4 GB files or something like a very big data set, then you cannot do it with your normal RStudio and R provisions. There are a lot of ways that you can do it. You can connect R to Hadoop, you can connect it to some external Oracle, database system, or you can use Microsoft R Client, which is another, just like you have CRAN, which has certain packages. There is a Microsoft R Client's Visual Studio, which is very similar to RStudio, but which helps you to deal with very, very big data sets. But if you try to do something and again, when I say lesser speed, it doesn't mean that it will take, say, minutes or hours. It will be by a few seconds, but it does make a difference when you're working in very competitive environments. So I think these were the advantages and drawbacks. If anyone has I think I can take the questions after we are done with what is a vectorized language. Yeah. So basically, R was, because it was built by statisticians, it's very biased towards linear algebra, and it lets you perform functions on a list or different matrices as though they were a single object. So just to give you an idea, so the leftmost code is in Python. So here, if you see, you have an array which is D, you have an array which is E, and you want to multiply D and E to get F. That's your aim. Now, because Python is not a vectorized language, what you will have to do is you will have to create a loop. So this loop, say for x in range 0 to length d, is basically, it says that for every x starting from 0th position, you look at the length of d, which is 5, you go to the 5th position, and then you repeat this step for every x. So what it does is, it will input x, like the position of x as 0, it'll give us 1 for D, 4 for E, and then multiply and give us the result here. And this is how basically a loop works. So you input some position and the loop keeps adding 1 to it till you tell it to stop, and then it gives you a result. Now this looks very simple at the moment, but imagine doing it for a 2D matrix, or imagine doing it for multiple arrays at the same time. So you will have to make 5 or 6 nested loops, and that can get extremely difficult when working with. So now how R is different. So the next code is written in R. In this case, you say that, okay, this is an array, D is an array with these elements, E is an array with these elements, and just print D into E. So R vector means having a position. So R understands that each element has a position and knows what position to multiply with another position. So it knows that the first position is 1 and 4 for D and E respectively, and the idea is to multiply it and give it in the first position in the matrix F. Now, this is so this basically reads the entire thing as an object, which makes mathematical functions and extremely easy in R. And I think that is that is what separates R from most high-level languages that we look at. This is just an example that I wanted to give. So if you look at the final data, the final image, it basically has 3 arrays which are multiplied individually by these 3 arrays in E. Now imagine doing it using this technique in Python. That would take you at least, I think, 15 lines of codes, and you would have to put different for loops within a for loop. But if you just do it with R understands understands that each number is a vector. It can in the backend, and then it just gives you the result. So this makes R extremely advanced when it comes to working with mathematical functions. I hope that was clear. If anybody has any doubt, I could. Okay, I'm assuming. Okay.
I had a doubt
so
in the
finally,
previous slide.
Oh, yeah, sure.
This one. I didn't get what exactly basic security here means, like what security means. That was one thing. And the other was regarding bigger data sets. What exactly would you consider a big data set? Like, is 2 lakh or 3 lakh, is that big or small? Just to put it into perspective.
Yeah, sure. So basic security, the idea is that because R is an open language, usually, so like, you know, when you work in banks, they usually prefer, or usually the corporate prefers using a statistical like softwares like say SAS or Tableau that are proprietary, and that basically, because you're buying it ensures another degree of security to your data. I think that's the only issue when you look at R, because it's open software. So, you know, accessing somebody else's data like hacking is simpler when you have an open software, open source software, rather when you have like a proprietary one. So again, this is not something that we need to worry about, you know, usually, but it's just to put it out there. Okay, so bigger data set, actually no, 2 or 3 lakh lines is not a big data set. You can go easily up to, I think in our 10 or 20 lakh rows, and you will not find any issue. It's a bigger data set would be say having 3 or 4 GB. So usually like 2 to 3 lakh lines would be a few MBs or a few hundred MBs at max. Whereas a big data set is something which is at least in, you know, a couple of GBs. So there R cannot store that much memory on its physical, you know, physically in the software, and there you will have to use some external database and connect R to that, or use something like RPlant. So I hope that is clear.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome. Okay, so I will move on. I'm assuming you have understood what like vectorized language is. Okay, so like Radhika said, so R and RStudio are different things. Now, RStudio is not an extension of R or a part of R. RStudio is an interface that has been like, you know, created to make working on R simpler and to add tools that basic R does not have. Now you can actually just download R and start working in the console, but it is quite difficult. So RStudio makes it more interactive and user-friendly. There is some disturbance. Somebody has to mute.
Moto X4 needs to be muted. The host in class.
Thank you. Okay, so just to give you an idea, when you first download RStudio, it can look a bit intimidating. So this is a small code that I had written, and just to show you how it looks. So the first thing, number one, this is called a text editor. A text editor is just like a normal plain notepad text editor. And by plain text editor, I mean that you cannot have any fonts or formatting that you have in MS Word, but it's just a very simple, like it's all, the formatting is already built into the system. Here you write your code, and like you would see, some of it is green, some of it is black, some of it is blue. So the green is basically, I've commented it. So like Radhika said, when you do data analytics, you need to, or you're writing any code, it is a good practice to comment and say what you're going to do, and after that you do the, like, you know, you put your code in. So this is basic. So I'm trying to say, okay, create a new theme, and creating and saving new themes. I want to see how that works. And then I write my code in here. Now here, this is the tabs bar where you can see rgraphics.r. And you can have several tabs open at the same time, and you can jump from one tab to another. So this is basic, and then you have your run function, and you can either run code in small chunks, or you can, you know, run your entire code. So you can do a lot of things, but this is basically what the text editor where you write your code. And this is basically the number of lines that you have already written. So here you can see it's around 607 at the moment. Now, this is the second window is called a console. So console is the only part of RStudio that actually is R itself. Console is where, so if you were to just open R, it will look like your console. Console is where your commands get executed. So if you run your command in your text editor, it will come to your console and then run the command. Now console, so you can also write your command in the console itself, but I think it makes it easier to reproduce and, you know, distribute if you have written it as an R script. Now here you would see, you get different, you know, if the code is not correct, or there is an issue, or there's a warning message, it is displayed in red with, it says what the issue is. And for anybody starting out on R, if you ever have an error, I would suggest just take that error and copy paste it into your Google search, and you will get an answer to what the error is. You don't even need to, don't bother paraphrasing it in Google search, just go and copy paste this error and somebody must have answered it already. The third thing is the environment tab. So this is the environment tab. So here you can see the variables that you're working with, the data sets, the variables that you've created, or the functions that you have created, and the data sets that you have loaded in this particular session. So here I can see, so I'm basically here working with housing prices in the US, and you can see that this is my data set and the number of variables it has, the observations it has. And okay, so a fact that I forgot to tell is that, so like Smriti said, that in Stata you cannot make your own functions, but because R is open, like it's an open software, you can create as many functions as you like and whatever tailors to your needs. So if you create a function, you will again see it in this particular window. And the final thing is, and this also gives an example of how easy it is to make a graph in R. And again, also this is not the code for this particular graph, it's another code, but just to see what a graph looks like. So this window is your file, browser, plots window, help window. So just like Smriti showed you how you can, okay, R does not have like an inbuilt tool system like Stata does. But if you need to understand any package or any command that you do not understand, you can just go to the help window and type it in, and it will give you the entire documentation for that particular package or command. You can also view the packages that are already installed and the packages that you want to install, and any plots that you create will automatically pop up, and then you can see all the files that you have uploaded to R. And that just makes it easier to, you don't have to switch between different files. You can just click on this file. You can connect R to your documents, and it will just show you all the files in your documents. So if you just want to open a particular file, you don't have to switch between windows. And I think that kind of gives an overall idea of what the RStudio interface looks like. Now you can, like, once you get, you get an idea of how it looks, you can just Google some data set or packages, or look at your existing packages and read about them and start exploring. Finally, how to get started. So the first is the installation. So first you will have to install your CRAN, or the R base, and over that you will have to install RStudio, for which the links have been provided. Now, a lot of people, don't know where to begin. So I think a good idea is to master a few packages, or get a basic working knowledge of a few packages that can help you, more or less traverse this universe. So I think Tidyverse is a Tidyverse deployer. These are the two packages that are used for data cleaning, managing, wrangling. ggplot2, as Radhika said, is used to make these excellent graphs. ISLR or GLM is for anybody who wants to look at regression. And then Markdown or RShiny. RShiny is something if you want to make a publication. So these are a few packages that you should, I think if you go and Google how to get started with Tidyverse, you will get a lot of publications and a lot of websites that have, that also provide data sets along with instructions for you to begin. The next is a cheat sheet. A cheat sheet is a very important part of learning how to code in R, because so if you want to look at a cheat sheet for deployer, I don't know if, I think, oh yeah, I might be able to show it to you in a second. So you want to look at different cheat sheets and keyboard shortcuts. I think once you start programming, your aim should be to not use your mouse pad at all. So it is really good and handy to learn keyboard shortcuts. Next are the online courses. These are the two online courses that I have put the links to, which are really good if you want to start, basic programming in R. There is a book by, I think, H. Wickham, who created most of these packages. So he has written a book called R for Data Science, which will help you get started with all the basic packages when it comes to managing and working with data. And finally is the GitHub community. Now, what is GitHub? GitHub is a website that allows developers and users connect on a platform and gives them a common platform to work with. And people are like, you can share data sets, you can share your code, somebody can review it for you, you can ask questions. So GitHub has like a special R community explorer and an NHS R community, which is basically a platform, and Stack Overflow, which is a platform where with the entire R community communicates. So you can put your code there, you can put your questions there, you can look at different data sets. So I would advise everyone to go see what GitHub is. It is confusing when you start it, but to make an account and just explore what GitHub is. So just to show you what a cheat sheet looks like. So suppose I want to look at, let's say, an import cheat sheet. So I want to see how can I import my data. So this is a small cheat sheet that will show you how to import different data sets, what all can you import, the different data types. So it basically gives you an entire idea of how to import data, what to do with it, how to save it. And it is usually your go-to guide for any package or any function in R. I think that's it with R. If anybody has a doubt, I can clear it, or we can move on to Python. Okay. Prerna, I think.
Yeah, so I think because we've been going on for a while, so we put together some slides on Python, which is basically just based on stuff I've asked my friends, because I've never actually used Python before. To be honest, if you're in these eco-policy type jobs, you're not going to necessarily use this much. You might need certain tasks that you want to pick up for Python, like web scraping and maybe certain API. But yeah, I mean, you can refer to these pros, and there are a bunch of libraries, names of the libraries that we've mentioned here later when you're looking at slides, if this is something that interests you. Pallavi and Mitali, are you on the call? No. Okay, great. So yeah, I think we're not going to go over Python then. I think it's gone on for a while. What we can maybe now do is maybe take questions. If you guys have any questions on data or R, and what we are sort of planning is to do sessions on both of these softwares, because this is where these are softwares that a bunch of us know, so we can help out with that, and do very basic intro sessions, which will just be literally starting from scratch, all of the things that you've seen here in terms of interface, but also types of data, exactly the commands you would be using and things like that. And then based on the level that everyone's at, maybe we could have sessions that cater to those different levels. So that's sort of the plan. So if you guys have any thoughts that you'd like to share on how you think you want to learn these softwares, you can do that now. But yeah, we'll also be sharing a Google form when we share the recording, which has some of these things. But yeah, if you want to talk about whether this was useful for you, what we've done today, how you'd like to move forward with it, anything like that, we'd love to hear those ideas.
Hi, just a quick question. Could you distinguish between the use cases for, say, a software like R and a language like Python?
So from the little that I know about Python, Python is basically a high-level language it's a programming language. It's not an analysis software. So Python is used by programmers and can be used for a host of different things. And you have certain packages in Python like NumPy, Pandas, like I mentioned, that can also be used for analysis. R is more catered to data analytics and data science. So if you're looking at, say, if you have to work in tandem with, software developers and, different kinds of professions, Python helps there because it's a common platform, whereas R would be specifically if you want to work in the field of data analytics or science or research. I think Yeah, that would be the main difference, because Python can be used for anything. It's just like C++ or Java or any other programming language.
Okay, thank you.
I think.
So does anyone else
Okay.
have any like questions? It can be really like anything you want to ask, like how much time it would take to pick these languages up or anything.
Does anyone use any of these softwares on the latest Mac OS? Because I feel like um, I I can't like find the latest version of R that's suited to my OS at the moment, and the same has happened to me with SPSS as well. Okay, I guess no one's like using that model. Okay. That's all there.
Have you checked on the CRAN? Like I use Windows, but if you could just go and check on the CRAN website, they usually have latest, like they keep updating the,
Yeah.
yeah, so it might take
So I'm
time.
on CRAN and it's saying we will not support Mac OS 8.6 to 9.2.2 anymore. Starting from, what does it say? Starting with R 1.8.0, there'll only be the Mac OS Darwin build of R. So I don't know. I think I'll have to check more. With SPSS, I know for sure that they just haven't made an update yet. Apple is supposed to also make one of those, and they haven't. I don't know. It's really annoying. Like this is a recognized problem with SPSS, but with R, I'm not sure. I'll have to look more.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. It's because like I also like Samya, I just use Windows, so I'm not sure what the problem would be. It's probably because of like, yeah, as you said, like they must have not updated like for R as well. Like I'm not sure, honestly. Sorry.
So a workaround, like, so if you want a solution, like if you really want to work with R, it would be to download Linux on your laptop, which is another programming soft like language. And I think that will, because R runs beautifully on Linux, and so does SAS and SPSS. So I worked with them. So if you really
Oh,
want to get into
that's a good idea.
learning that, then it will be to download Linux and work on it.
That'll be good. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And Linux usually, because it's also open software, so it supports everything, and it's constantly getting updated. Things are getting updated. So if you want, I can send you documentation on how to do Linux and how to download
Yeah,
Emacs.
that
Yeah,
would be good.
yeah, sure. I can send that to you.
Are you on the org group or
Yeah. I
okay,
will
great.
just message it on Zulip. Put a link
Oh,
there.
thanks. Thank you.
Okay, there's a question from Pratishtha on chat, which is about how much time it would take to pick up these languages. So I guess like first I can answer this personally. I can actually answer this because I have tried to pick up art and it has not worked out. So I would say if you have a clear sort of objective that I want to be able to do X using this software, it will not actually take you too much time to pick up exactly that. So if you set a target for yourself that by the end of this week, I want to be able to like maybe make these 5 graphs on data and art, it shouldn't take you too much time to pick it up. And then if you set yourself those targets regularly and just expand the targets, you would get more comfortable with the language. But if you like, I've tried to learn R purely from like an abstract, I want to learn R without having like a very clear sort of target for myself. And I do it for a while and then I go off it, and then I did it for a bit for that data analysis course and I left it. So yeah, that's just my personal thing, that it won't take too much time if you get to it and have a clear sort of task that you want to learn from it. But yeah, anyone else can like chip in about this.
Yeah, I think
Just to add, oh, please, Radhika, go.
I was just gonna say, just to add on to Prerna's point, like she said, like if you have a project that you want to do and there's like a particular data set that you have in mind that you want to explore, I think a good way to be able to do that is to start using it with the language that you want to learn. And it would make sense because then you're looking at the data and then you start like using like these descriptive statistics to understand what the data means, and then try to find correlations between the variables that you want to look at, and then basically to have like a visual for those correlations as well, you start forming graphs for it. So I think that's how you end up doing it. And like one other thing in addition, if you are not able to, I guess, come up with a project, I'm sure Coursera or like any other online community which offers courses may have like project-based learning processes as well. And if not, I would suggest another website which is called Kaggle, and they have like online like courses and competitions as well, where you like enter into a competition of like they provide you with like some like situation or like some challenge of like we want you to like there's I think a COVID-19 challenge about like how to improve, I don't know, homelessness or something on those lines. And they, I don't know if they provide you the data set or not, but at least if you have that goal in mind that you want to explore something and you want to answer a particular question, I think it helps if you start working towards that goal through using a statistical software.
So given my personal experience, I started learning R about, I think now 7 months ago. And it was, I just started, I just downloaded R and started exploring it. One thing that really helped me personally was to get onto a course. So I went on edX and I got like there's a very good course by a Harvard professor on the basics of R. Like it's good if you have like a weekly thing to, know about different aspects of R and how to do some basic data management. Again, when you say good at it, it's a relative term. You just need to have a basic working knowledge of a software, and then once it's more on a learn on your job situation, and there is so much to it. I don't think you can explore all of it at once, and it will take quite a bit of time. But one would be to get on, if you can pay, then it is good to get on like a certified course, because that like good incentive. And second would be so I have made a document that has all the links that you would need to get, get good at most of the packages, and most of them have a data set provided to get good at that particular package. So it would be to just start using it and just follow the code online till you get comfortable with coding it yourself, like completely independently. So I think, yeah, like now I could say that I have a good enough working knowledge of R, and it took me around like 3 to 4 months, 4 months or 5 months to understand it. But it can take far lesser if you are more consistent with it, unlike me.
Great. Are there any other questions or suggestions for how we should structure learning these languages going forward? Yeah, Shreya, we'll send out the doc. It's pretty good.
I will share it with you. It's already on Zulip, but I will share it again.
No, but everyone's not on Zulip.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So do you want me to just post it here at the moment?
Yeah, and then when we send out the Google form, we can just send it with that and the slides.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
You have to give me a minute.
Yeah, no problem. Cool. So I think in terms of next steps, thank you so much for joining the session. This went on like quite long, but I think in terms of next steps, what we will be doing is we'll send a Google form to everyone. We'll send across the slides. For the recording, we're sort of working on a website. If that happens soon, we'll put the recording up on there. If it's taking a bit longer, we'll directly share the recording. On the Google form, we'd basically like to know what language you're interested in learning and picking up, and then we can have more introductory separate sessions for those. For a bunch of you might know that we use Zulip to communicate. So far, it was just within working groups. But one of the things that we've been thinking is setting up study groups or learning groups. So if 10 of you are interested in learning data, then having a group on Zulip, so it can sort of be like a study group where you can set targets for yourselves and ask each other doubts if you don't want to put them elsewhere, or sort of encourage or push each other to do it. Maybe you could do online courses together and things like that. For instance, if I was doing like an online course an hour with somebody else, that would motivate me to hopefully do it more. So yeah, that's our next step for PD and data stuff. Yeah, and Soumya just sent the doc as well. Awesome. Soumya, do you want to, or Radhika, or anybody, do you guys want to have any last words?
I think the thing is to not be intimidated. It feels weird when you start, and it's quite confusing. And again, I don't think we should stress so much on the language. At the end of the day, if you kind of understand how to go about, managing your data and what the steps are and what the algorithm is, it doesn't matter which language it is, you will pick it up. So, and Google, please, Google is your best friend. So just put everything on Google and you'll find an answer. It might take a bit of time, but I think you'll get it. So, I just hope we all start coding very soon and make some cool projects.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I would just say thank you for joining for this session, and I hope you sign up for future sessions, or we might put up with I would just on the past ending note, I would just say that always try to keep your do files and R scripts with you, because never delete them, because you would definitely need something from those R scripts that you would have written a couple of years ago. They always come in handy. Yeah, make do file and R scripts your best friend. That's what I would say.
Hi guys, I would just like to add one thing, which is that as you plan to learn a language here, Stata or R or whatever it be, just remember that since we guys know some parts of it, so we will act as a supporting system for you. So that is one advantage that you actually have, unlike a lot of us who had to learn it our own way. So whatever language you choose, which you will fill out in the Google Forms, remember that we will be scheduling sessions based on that, so you can learn along with the parallel group and make buddies, and that can help you learn better. So yes, that's just one thing I wanted to add. So it's not intimidating, you can learn it. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. I definitely think that is one of the points of this group, that we want everyone to sort of learn together and from each other. For instance, even I think I'm fairly comfortable with data. I know I'm absolutely horrible at art. So we want to encourage everyone to sort of learn as much as possible from each other in a completely no judgment. You can ask any doubt, no matter how small you think it is, kind of space. So yeah, we're looking forward to future sessions, and cool, that's it for today.
Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Bye guys. Good night.
Bye.